Just give a brief bit about my background, because the bishop asked me to do this, so you kind of know who I am. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, but I now live in Tallahassee, Florida. And I started Vianney Vocations 14 years ago, as of yesterday, the Feast of St. John Vianney. So very, very grateful to work within the church and see a lot of dioceses and work in a lot of parishes. It's been an amazing 14 years. I'm married. I have 4 children. My oldest is 20 years old, and my youngest just turned 11, but she thinks she's 25. You know how that is, right? I'm an ex-seminarian. I was a seminarian 20 years ago for the Diocese of Savannah. I often say we need more ex-seminarians, right? Because that means that guys were willing to give it a try. Guys were willing to give it a try. And I'm very grateful for the formation that the church gave me. After I discerned out of seminary, I went to work for another Catholic communication company called Catholic Stewardship Consultants, which I think has worked in the diocese in Grand Island. Some of my friends, maybe you've met Tommy Rose. He's been at some of your parishes. But I worked there for about 8 years, and then I looked around the church. And this is 14 years ago, and I said, we spend so much time and resources and energy teaching people about stewardship, right? Which we should. You have a role to play in your parish, right? We should do that. I thought, man, many dioceses are not expending the same amount of energy to talk about vocations throughout the whole diocese, right? And so that was kind of our mission, is to help a diocese to refocus, or as Bishop Hannafelt says, to reignite this culture of vocations. And that's what we've been doing. I do want to get just a sense of who's here today. Who's here today? So, how many priests do we have here? We have priests, okay, we've got some hands, we've got a good dozen at least. How many deacons do we have? Wow, a lot of deacons. Welcome, okay. How many sisters do we have? Hi, sisters. How are you? Thank you. Do we have any brothers, religious brothers here? Okay. How many people are married? Raise your hand. Wow, that's a lot of folks. Okay. How many single folks here? Okay. All right. A good number. Now, we kind of went through the main vocations there. Now let's think about your other roles for just a minute. How many school principals do we have? Okay. They're the stern-looking ones. I see. Okay. All right. He cracked a smile, though, when I said that. Okay. How many DREs? DREs, okay. Good number. How many folks are catechists, like teach parish faith formation? Okay, great. Great. We have a lot for you guys today. And then school teachers? School teachers, okay, fair number. All right. And how about, we're going to hear about Sarah International later, but how many people here are from the Sarah Club? Okay, we've got a fair number, okay. And then how many people, I'm very interested in this, don't fit in any of those roles necessarily, but are just an interested lay person in your parish who wants to foster vocations? Okay, that's great. I am so glad you guys are here. We have a lot for you, and I want to speak particularly to you that it's going to be your job to sort of carry this back to your parish in a little bit, in some ways, right? So that's going to be your role today. A couple of years ago, I was doing some vocation stories of various priests and seminarians, and I interviewed a guy from the Diocese of Baltimore. His name was James Borick, and he was a really, really bright young guy. he, in college, got interested in finance. He'd grown up Catholic, but he kind of fell away during his college years. He got a really fancy job at some investment company. He was making tons of money. He fell away from the church completely. But his friend, his good buddy from high school, actually went to seminary. This guy went to seminary. And James was still friends with him, but they kind of drifted apart in terms of faith. Well, this fellow's ordination rolled around. James said, well, I'm not really going to church, but I'll go to his ordination, right? And so he goes to the ordination. If you've ever been to an ordination, right, it's one of the most beautiful liturgies the church celebrates. James said he was bored to tears at the ordination. He said that afterwards, there was a little party at the newly ordained priest's house, at his parents' house. So they stayed there late at night, and a lot of people came, and it was a good time, and everybody went home. And it was just James and this young new priest and his family. Well, the new priest's sister comes up to him and says, hey, we have a problem. She said, my brother's first mass is first thing tomorrow morning, but he hasn't heard a confession yet. And we're his family, so we're not going to him, so it's got to be you. He's like, what in the world? So he says he finds himself out in a parked car on the street with his newly ordained friend going to confession for the first time in 6 years. Right? So, and he told me on the phone, he told me this, that, despite it being a forced sacrament, it was a real turning point for him. It was actually a moment of grace for him. Well, here's where the kind of the miracle happens. The next morning, go to the priest's first mass. He said he was sitting toward the back of the church. And when he turned around to see his friend processing down the aisle as a priest for the first time, he had the biggest smile in the world on his face. And James said at that moment, he heard God saying to him, do you see how happy he is? When are you going to be my priest? And to make a long story short, he started meeting with an older priest, spiritual direction, etc. He applied to become a seminarian, and he was a seminarian within 4 months for that diocese. And now, this was a few years ago, he is actually the rector of the Baltimore Basilica. It's one of the most important churches in America. Now, here, this is something that's interesting. I mentioned that he started going in a spiritual direction with this older priest. Well, he actually lived with that priest in the rectory for a while and would help out at the parish and this sort of thing. So here's where the story gets great. I was interviewing, we're doing vocation stories, right? Well, I was interviewing another seminarian from the same diocese. And this guy, he said he had felt the call when he was 14 years old, felt the call to priesthood. But he didn't enter seminary till he was 34. I said, man, what the heck took you so long, right? He said, I had a serious girlfriend. He worked for NASA for a while, this guy. I said, well, then what was the turning point? What launched you into seminary? He says, I remember it like it was yesterday. He said, I was sitting at Sunday Mass at my parish, and there was this fella who came up and gave his vocation story, and his name was James Borick. And when I heard him speak, I knew I couldn't run from God anymore. And he's also an ordained priest in Baltimore today. So, here's the thing. God works in mysterious ways, right? He really does. And even though you may have heard more dramatic vocation stories than these, right? Perhaps you have. God can work in ordinary ways and extraordinary ways. I have a priest friend, Father Brett Brannon. He likes to say, God can raise up 1,000,000 priests from the rocks on the ground, right? Miracles can happen. God can do miracles. And I believe, as I suspect you guys too, that God is calling a sufficient number of young people to be priests, to be sisters, to be brothers, to be holy married Christian couples, right? But it is up to us to amplify God's call. God often speaks through us, right? And that's what we're going to be focusing on today is what is your role to amplify God's call, especially as we kick off this new vocation plan. So what are the things that we're going to do today? I'm going to give you just a preview. I always like to know exactly what we're doing, today, right? So here's what we're focusing on. We're going to talk about the vocation crisis and its solutions, kind of in a broad way. Father Pratt is going to talk to us about how real-life young people discern, right? How this actually happens in real life, the pathway to seminary or convent or monastery. How does that really happen? Then we're going to break for Mass. After number 2, we're going to break for Mass and lunch. Then we're going to come back and we're going to go over the nuts and bolts of our vocation plan. So we're kind of laying a spiritual foundation this morning, and then this afternoon we'll get into some of the practicals, okay? And then before we leave, Father Pratt is going to speak again and give you some inspiration for going forth back to your parishes and schools, wherever you work. Okay, but before we dive into this, I've sort of been praying. I give some talks like this fairly frequently, and God has been placing something on my heart recently. And it's this, it's like, we're going to be talking all day about inviting young people to give their whole lives for the rest of their lives to God. This is a big ask, right? That's what we're going to be talking about. And it begs the question, have we given our whole lives to God for the rest of our lives? Because we should really only feel comfortable asking this to other people if we've done it ourselves, right? So can we say, in our heart, Lord, all of my life for the rest of my life? That's what he's calling us to, is that deep conversion, that total gift of self. And we, in this room, have got to do that. I've got to do that. And only then are we really going to have, I think, the authority to go out and ask others to do the same. So I'm going to go over some statistics about the church in America. Are we in a vocation crisis? I've heard people say, oh, no, it's a demographic, Yes, we are in a vocation crisis. Okay? Yes, we are. And I'm going to prove it. Okay, just a simple graph of the U.S. Catholic population. The Catholic population has grown 40% since 1970. By the way, there's a lot of ways to measure this. This is the official Catholic directory. We have the 4th largest Catholic population of any country in the world. Did y'all know that? The U.S.? That's pretty big, right? So the other, in order, is Brazil, Mexico, the Philippines, the United States, and then Italy. Quiz question. What country in the world has the highest percentage of Catholics? Anyone? Oh, somebody got Vatican City. It's Vatican City. That was a trick question. 100% Catholic. Yeah, you ruined it. No. He got it. He got it. Gold star. Somebody give this guy a gold star. So the U.S. Catholic population is growing. And my little clicker is not clicking. Oh, here we go. Okay. At the same time, the number of priests and sisters is falling. So the number of sisters in the U.S. has declined by 121,000 since 1970. Just to illustrate this point, I travel fairly frequently, around the country, and I'm always staying in the old convent, right? It's the old convent. They renovated it to be a guest quarter. In any given year, more than 3/4 of women's religious communities will not have a single novice, meaning a new entrant. Okay? Now, I don't want this to be doom and gloom. There are some vibrant religious orders, women's religious orders, and I want to just recognize that there are many organizations and communities in the church that sort of have a life cycle, and this has happened before in the church. Okay, so lest we get too doomy and gloomy. Okay, my little thing's not working great. Okay, number of priests in the United States since 1970. The numbers declined by 24,000 since 1970. Compared to 2000, this is an interesting stat. Compared to 2000, today there are 7 million more Catholics and 9,000 fewer priests. Okay. One study showed that for every 100 priests who die or retire, about 30 men are getting ordained. And I've heard some people say, well, this is just an aberration. It was an aberration that we ordained all those priests back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and this is just the correction. You know what? I do not buy that. I don't. And I'll tell you why. It's because vibrant Catholic faith communities should produce vocations, right? That was not an aberration. There was a faith that was alive, right? Get seminarians, which I don't know what. Okay. Now, this is interesting. Essentially, the number of seminarians is about flat for the last 25 years. That's the total number of seminarians. In some ways, this is kind of like better news than you might expect, I think. There was a huge, you can see, there's a huge drop, and then it kind of levels off. Now, every once in a while, I run into people who say, well, man, the seminaries are full. This is amazing. We have the seminary is needing to build new rooms to house all these guys. And I say, you know why that is, right? Because in 1975, there were 167 seminaries in the United States. And today there are 68. So yes, some of the ones that are left over are full, right? So you just need to understand that dynamic that's happening. Now I want to share a kind of a shocker slide here. And it has to do with marriages. And I've heard that some people have said the real crisis in vocation is marriage. And I have to say that I think that the data show that. There will be fewer than 1/4 the number of marriages this year as there was 50 years ago. That's with population increase. Okay? Even in the last 20 years, there's been an annual drop of 164,000 marriages. That's like every parish in America having 10 fewer weddings. Okay? So the decline in marriage is twice as bad as the decline in the number of priests by percentages. So igniting a culture of vocations in the Diocese of Grand Island, you are going to have to focus on marriage as well as priesthood and religious life, right? Because look, let's be honest. Let's be real about this. Holy Catholic families, right? That's the source of future priests, sisters, brothers, and other marriages, right? We need holy Catholic families, and we need to challenge young people to reevaluate what they think about marriage. A lot of people are not getting married, or they're not getting married in the church. This is part of the crisis. And when we talk, we're going to get into this afternoon, but when we talk to young people, teenagers, guys, even younger than teenagers, we need to emphasize the beauty and sacredness of marriage. Okay. All right, just want to show this quickly. This is number of parishes without a resident pastor. So you can see that, just look here. I don't know that this is to scale, but 20% of parishes in America don't have a priest, a resident priest. That's a lot. You are definitely experiencing that in this diocese, right? Definitely experiencing that. I guess oftentimes what happens is the parish is redesignated as a mission when this happens. Okay. What are the specific scenarios for the Diocese of Grand Island? I just want to show, this is going to be like a single slide showing the present reality. And you guys may have seen this in the magazine. Y'all all get the magazine, right? This was a really beautiful issue. Wow. Thank you, Angie and Greg, for putting this together. Angie and Greg Fisher from the Chancery did a really, really good job on this. It's a little infographic. A couple things that stand out to me right away. It should stand out to you. 36 active priests, 36 parishes. That's not good, guys. 7 seminarians, although that number has even changed, I think, since the magazine came out. 20 sisters, 256 marriages. Some of these numbers are good for the number of parishes, you know? So some of the parishes do have some vibrancy, as you see in these numbers here. I do want to, though, read a paragraph to you from the bishop's letter that he released back, I guess, in February of this year. This is about priesthood. Bishop Hanafelt says, "Our last priestly ordination took place in May of 2020. Those next to be ordained priests, if they persevere, will be ordained in May of 2026. It's a 6-year gap. Between now and then, at least 9 priests currently serving in our parishes will be eligible to retire. At the same time, should an accident or serious illness take one of our current pastors out of ministry, there is no one to replace him on a permanent basis. Our retired priests have been most generous in providing coverage for our pastors when they are away, but as they age, their availability is becoming more limited." So the letter goes on, if you've read it, to discuss the challenges with bringing priests in from other countries, the very real possibility that some parishes or missions will not be able to have Mass on Sundays. This is a very real and serious situation. Make no mistake about that. That is why there are 200 people in this room, right? This is a big problem, and it requires a big solution. Now, I know that you guys, this could be a little bit of doom and gloom, right? You've heard of, well, what I call negative Nelly and positive Peter, right? Negative Nelly looks at all these stats and gets really, really depressed, and she starts wringing her hands, and what are we going to do? And I'm sometimes like that, okay? So I know negative Nelly. She's my cousin. She's my twin sister. Right? But then I do think, though, much more healthy way to look at these stats is from the point of view of positive Peter, right? And here's our model. Do you remember in Acts 2? This is like one of my favorite passages in the whole Bible. It's a real time of darkness for the early church. Jesus has died. He's gone. The apostles are scared. They don't know what to do. They're directionless. And the descent of the Holy Spirit in Acts 2. And Peter gets up, and he's just full of this new life, this new vigor, this new enthusiasm, right? So that when things are dark, we know that the sun is going to rise. You've heard this before, but we are an Easter people, right? We do look with hope and optimism. Jesus has conquered the world. There is plenty of hope for optimism in the church. And so I think that while we see some of these stats as a real challenge and a serious challenge, we should not be dismayed. The Lord is with us. So I want to talk now about some signs of hope in the church. But before I do that, I want to make one small observation. Father Hoke had mentioned I came here in 2016 and did a day with the priests. And so that was 6 years ago. And we've been working together on this vocation plan for the past 6 or 7 months, 8 months, I think. And I want to say that my very sincere observation of the Diocese of Grand Island is that things are better in some quarters. And in many places, there is definitely more going on for youth. There's definitely more engagement of young people than there were 6 years ago. So there are signs of hope. Okay? And I'm going to talk to you about some more signs of hope. First is growing youth movements. There is an energy in the young church today that is different than it was in the past. And it seems to be growing. We got Trevor Fisher here is in the second row, one of our seminarians, and he spent all summer doing Totus Tuus, this program for young people. There's missionaries that go out to different parishes and engage people in their faith. That's growing all across America, right? There are other examples. If you're familiar with NET, Focus, Life Teen is still growing, by the way. Steubenville conferences, NCYC. There is an energy in the church that gives us room for hope. If you've never been to one of these conferences and been in a room with, 10,000 teenagers who are on fire for their faith, I encourage you, if you have the opportunity, do it. It is a spiritual shot in the arm. It really is. It's a sign of hope. By the way, this is really cool. So the Steubenville youth conferences, there's 19 of them throughout the United States. At the final Mass, they always challenge young people, not challenge, they invite them to say, hey, if you feel a call to the priesthood or religious life, would you stand up? It's at the final Mass of this on fire weekend. And they literally will have hundreds of teens stand up. And they'll give them, a standing ovation that lasts, 2 minutes. There is definite signs of hope there. There is a strong vocation culture in some places in the church. And the reason I point this out is just to say it's possible. It's possible because we can see it, right? I think the Diocese of Wichita is a favorite example of mine. I used to work with them back in the day with Catholic stewardship consultants, and they have a lot going on. They have more seminarians than they can pay for. Their seminarian poster is, wow, it's an incredible thing. And they only have 200,000 Catholics. They have more seminarians than New York City, Archdiocese of New York. So things are possible there. I really want everyone here in the room to hear this. Seminaries today are much healthier than they were in the past. You can get online and you can read some things by people who don't know what they're talking about. They don't when it comes to seminary. People are complaining about seminaries and they haven't been to one, right? I have, my parents are friends with this guy who went to seminary in the 70s, and I guess it was the 70s. I'm just going to be real here for a second. He will singe your eyebrows off with tales of very serious immorality happening in the seminary. I'm just going to be real, okay? That is not happening in seminaries anymore. There are many experts today that say seminaries are healthier today than they ever have been, right? They're good places. If you go to them and you have lunch with these guys and you see what they're studying and you see their fervent prayer in the chapel, you will be impressed. Seriously, you will be. Some people say, hey, can I come here? Right? When they visit. They do, don't they, Trevor? I mean, they say that. So be confident in that. Just one little illustration of this. I went to Mundelein Seminary in Chicago. This is maybe 3 years, right before the pandemic. And I had lunch with these seminarians just in their refectory. I was so impressed with these guys. They were in touch with real life. They had deep humility. They had a love for the people of God that they were going to serve. They were. I walked away from lunch going, man, I wish one of those guys would be in my parish. And I have really good priests in my parish. So things are much better in seminaries. Okay. The fourth sign of hope that I see, enthusiastic young priests. You guys may know this. Guy gets out of seminary, he's on fire with his faith, he wants to do a lot, and I think that's great, right? Because if you're 19 years old, it's nice to have a 28-year-old priest to talk to, right? I'm not, all you priests who are older than 28, you're not letting you off the hook, okay? You too can connect with young people, but I think this is a sign of hope for the future. So, what is the solution to the vocation crisis? When you go to the doctor and you tell him what hurts, hopefully he can tell you what the cause is, right? You complain about the symptoms, and hopefully he can treat the underlying condition. So right now, bishops are hurting. They look at their list of parishes, they look at their list of priests, and very often, one list is shorter than the other. Something has to be done. We need a cure. But first, we need the diagnosis. So what really is going on? I say in a phrase, it's lack of discipleship. Lack of discipleship. The new president of Sarah International is from Nebraska. He's from Omaha, Greg Schweitz. I had dinner with him, it was a few years ago. Had a great conversation. He was also very involved in Tech Teens Encounter Christ, if you remember that movement. Pretty cool movement. He told me something interesting I will never forget. He said, I hear a lot of people complaining that we lose teens after confirmation. Or we lose teens after high school. Or we lose teens in college. He said, my impression is we never had them. lack of discipleship. And so, the foundational principle is a culture of vocations requires a culture of discipleship. So sometimes, I just want to tell you this, sometimes when you go into a room of 10, 14-year-olds and you want to talk about the priesthood, I have a friend, Father Joe Hirsch, he says, that's like starting with S at the alphabet sometimes. You sometimes have to start with A. Is there a God? Who is Jesus? Does he love me? How can I have a relationship with him? Right? You're not going to get to S unless you've done the ABCs first. So there is no silver bullet when it comes to vocations work. There's no shortcut. Fanning the flames of faith in individual hearts is the only answer. Just before I turn things over to Father Pratt, I want to be sure that we're on the same page when we talk about the meaning of vocations. So your vocation is the specific way you live as a disciple of Jesus. How many of you guys have a priest in the family? Right? How many has a priest in the family? Okay. Fair, wow. How many have a sister in the family or a brother? Okay, a fair number. So you understand that your son or daughter or brother or sister, I hope that you saw that they were thriving in their vocation once they found it. I hope you saw that. Most people will report that, yes, my son looks very happy in seminary. My brother is very happy as a priest, right? We need to realize that happiness and holiness kind of go hand in hand. And it's very important that you're in your correct vocation, the one that God's called you to. Okay, we typically recognize three main vocations: marriage, priesthood, consecrated life. And we also talk about single life. Some have pointed out that from a strictly theological perspective, maybe single life is not exactly a vocation because it doesn't involve a permanent commitment. But however, the Catechism does talk about the single life. And I'm bringing this up very pointedly and on purpose because I personally have had single people who have ministered in my life in a very, very impactful way. I'm thinking especially of a teacher I had in high school who he would say he was single for the Lord. That's what he would say. And he was a father in the school that I went to. Amazing guy. And I think, too, that we need to recognize that there are life is messy and complicated, and we've all experienced hardship and difficulties. And some folks just don't get married for whatever reason or can't go to seminary. And we need to recognize that they have a very, very important role to play in the church. And the Catechism talks about this as well. So let's just say this. Your vocation is your primary mission in life. Even if you're a teacher and you're at the school for 9 hours a day. If you're married, your vocation to marriage is paramount. I'm going to end with a story. A 150 years ago, there was a little town in France with a little church that had not been used in many, many years. The town was made up of about 40 families and 4 taverns, bars. Do the math. So, rainy area of the country, flat topography, soil didn't drain well, is a really muddy, miserable little place, okay? And lo and behold, the bishop of that diocese assigned a newly ordained priest to this little place. And it was in the middle of nowhere. The priest got lost on the way. He finally shows up, and people were not too welcoming because he was a strange-looking dude, with a really thin face and a scratchy voice. The younger people of this town had never even seen a priest. The older townspeople who had seen a priest suspected what was going on. They suspected that the bishop thought he could waste this priest on a little town. Not a very charitable thought. But the priest got to work. He cleaned the church himself. He repainted the woodwork by hand. He replaced the rotting vestments he found in the dusty sacristy. He bought new vestments with his own money. He was not rich. He visited the townspeople every single day. He prayed for them. He fasted for them. He subsisted for long periods of time on a few moldy potatoes. He would stay up all night long writing homilies that only a dozen people heard. But little by little, the church began to fill up. The lines for confession got longer and longer. This weird, odd little priest had the spiritual stamina of a marathon runner. He simply would not give up on his quest to bring souls to Jesus. And so the town and its people were changing. The taverns shut down one by one. The reputation of this priest spread to nearby villages and throughout France. Eventually, thousands of people came to visit the little town of Ars. In the last year of Father John Vianney's life, over 100,000 people stood in line for hours to confess their sins to a priest who seemed like he could read their souls. So St. John Vianney was canonized in 1925. 4 years later, the Pope declared him the patron saint of parish priests. And you may remember that 2009, during the Year for Priests, St. John Vianney became the patron of all priests, diocesan and religious. So yes, the moral of the story is there is hope in every situation. And for the rest of the day, we are going to talk about solutions.